To make a Henrician boned kirtle, you will need a lining, a cotton interlining, a linen canvas interlining, and an exterior fabric, as well as some fancy fabric for the neckline. For this project, I plan to use woven black cotton for the lining, interlining, and exterior with a linen canvas from Fabrc-store. Here I'm working through the layers of the front bodice, which was one of the more complex pieces in the garment. The canvas interlining is cut out without seam allowance and will be permanently basted to the canvas interlining layer. The lining and outer fabric could be made of different materials, but I chose cotton to keep the costs down and to help a bit with breathability, since the finished ensemble is going to be very heavy and layered. On the outer layer, I'm marking the lines for the angles and placement of the bones. Since my boning is going to be differently sized from the pattern's bones, I just mark where the beginning and end points for each section are, and the angle they're meant to sit at, and where the tops of the bones are supposed to end. I'll go in after this and fill in the lines for the bones using a piece of boning for scale, as well as connect the dots on the upper markings. The next step is to baste all of my pieces together, which means basting the canvas to the interlining first for the front pieces, and then basting the cotton interlining for the back and front pieces to their respective outer pieces from the outer layer. Once all of my basting was done, I realized some of my chalk lines were fading pretty rapidly, so I took a red thread and a thread marked and basted together the front pieces further to make sure I'd be able to follow all of the boning channel lines. I chose red for this part to help me differentiate these lines from the permanent basting on the inner lining, since I would have to later rip these out. I sewed up all the boning channels following my lines along the front before inserting the boning. For this project, I opted for the slightly cheaper option of oversized zip ties, also called duck ties. Since the project didn't need curvy shaping and I was already going to be plenty bulky from all of the layers, I wasn't worried about the thickness of the boning here. The bones just needed to be sanded a little bit before inserting. After all the bones have been inserted and the bottom has been basted close to hold them all in place, I had to remove all the basting threads with surgical precision. This was a massive pain in the butt, and if you do this, I'd honestly recommend investing in some actual basting thread, which is designed to tear out easier.
So I have just received my steel bone that was supposed to be for the center sort of busk area of the under bodice, and I'm thinking I should have gone with the thicker / larger size bones because this is very thin. Been pretty flimsy, and I'm pretty sure that this is supposed to be a sturdy sort of middle support. So, I don't want to have to pay for shipping for one single bone. That seems really silly. So what I'm going to do, I think, is insert this and then bend the top the way they tell you to in the directions. And then I'm going to put a zip tie in with it to bulk out the bottom part of it that goes in line with the rest of the zip tie bones. And hopefully that'll be okay. I am a little worried about this twisting, but maybe if I put the two together, it won't be as bad. Maybe. We're gonna find out.
Up next was one of the more confusing elements of the kirtle. Essentially, the directions called for a piece of piping to be made and inserted along the front neckline, which would later in the construction be pulled slightly to bring the neckline closer to the bust. Mine ended up catching in the decorative layer that got put on top, so I'm not sure if this even actually worked for me. So I am about to start on the silk decorations for this bodice. I've just finished putting in and ironing down my bias tape, so that's all good to go. And basically what's going to happen is that all along this top band is going to be a line of silk which will peek up over the gown bodice that'll go over it. I am very afraid because silk is very expensive and you don't get that many choices, and this part of the construction has been kind of confusing for me. So basically the issues I'm having are the instructions aren't super clear about how you apply the decoration to the top part. Let me zoom out here so you can see better. So there's supposed to be a section that goes across the band here, and then there's some that goes over the sleeves like this. They don't tell you whether it goes over the bias tape or under the bias tape and you sew it down right here. I've looked at the photos, and as far as I can tell, you can't see the bias tape, so I think maybe it goes over, but then if you do that, you have the issue of if it goes over, then what do you do right here along the sleeves? I had a lot of back and forth on this in the Foundations Revealed Facebook group, which has been incredibly helpful. Constance McKenzie walked me through a lot of it, which was really nice. I think what I'm going to do is cut out the piece here like this, turn it over, and then where it has this little edge, I'm going to clip it, turn that over, and this part right here will just be folded under, and there will be a line right here where the two meet. I'm going to be adding jeweled decorations to this part as well, so hopefully it won't be too noticeable, but if I screw it up, I don't really have that many chances, because I only have about half a yard of this fabric for it. This fabric is not nearly as bright as it is in the camera. The camera's showing it much more vibrant than it really is. It is quite intense, but it's not quite as bright colored. There, that's a little bit better. You get the idea, but this is Penny Candy from Silk Baron. It's been a really pretty fabric, and I think it's going to look really nice, so fingers crossed that it actually works. I opted to hand sew down the bottom portion of the decorative panel, since feeding it through the machine would be cumbersome and I'd have to navigate around the central busk anyway. I clipped the edges to help negotiate the gentle curve of the bottom and turned it over onto the inside. This inner portion was whipped down with semi-large stitches. The inside can look basically as messy as you need it to, since there will be a lining applied later. They recommend in the book using a herringbone stitch, but I couldn't wrap my brain around how to do that at the time, so I continued whipping as usual. As mentioned before, the area that connects to the strap is tucked under, and I switched from a whip stitch to a ladder stitch for this portion to help it sit more seamlessly. The ladder stitch is not a historical stitch, but most of the materials and techniques I'm using for this aren't, so I'm not too worried about it. Alright, I've got my front on and it's all sewn down, and I have been trying to work my brain through what on earth is happening with these back pieces, and I have never sewn something quite as mind-bendingly confusing and frustrating, and I don't know if it was supposed to be or if my brain is just not working. But basically, what I think has to happen, and this could change because I've already changed it like 3 times, is as I've got my lines traced out here. Originally I was going to, sew it down, fold it over, sew it down, and then do it the same way I did the front. But then I realized this isn't a finished edge. This is going to get folded under for the lining, so I shouldn't be folding that under. So what I think I have to do is fold over this long line here so that it matches up cleanly with this. Then just stitch these lines down as is with the raw edges. Fold it up here so that it matches this line where the front is, and then tuck this part under like this. So basically, I have to do a different thing with every edge of this piece, and that is so confusing, but I think I've got it now. I just need to iron it, make sure it's good to go, and then stitch it down. Okay, pieces are ironed. I figured I'd come back on and show you exactly what I did. So the original piece takes on all of these angles. So what I did was I ironed down the side that cuts across the main body, the side that meets the other in the middle, and then the part where it meets the strap up at the top. And the way this is going to sit is going to be more or less like this. This part gets tucked under, so that makes that a clean edge. And then these two, or this also gets tucked under, excuse me. And then this just gets sewn along with the lining turned under, so I don't need to worry about that. I think I'm going to whip stitch this line down instead of doing an invisible stitch like a slip stitch. If I do tiny stitches, it shouldn't be that big of a deal, and also I think it's going to get covered up by the overgown, so it shouldn't matter. But I'm going to get started on that now. If you do this like how I'm doing this, give yourself bigger seam allowances, because I just had to do some witchcraft with this little corner, and it's not great. Give yourself big, beefy widths around it, because it takes more fabric than you think to turn it over and get it to wrap around. Just a little fun tip from me, because I've been having a #bad time. After all the silk portions were whipped down, I turned under all of the seam allowances around the edges of the garment except for the bottom, and whipped them down to hold them in place long term. This makes it much easier to apply the lining later. Moving on to the bottom half of the kirtle, this skirt is comprised of 3 sections, 1 front and 2 back panels. The front panel requires a canvas layer like the front panel of the bodice, an inner lining, a lining, and an outer layer. The pattern was traced and cut onto the canvas with no seam allowance and then used on all remaining pieces as the pattern. Whereas the bodice was cut out with an imprecise bubble of seam allowance, the skirts are cut out with an exact half-inch allowance to make it easier to assemble the pieces and keep them in order.
So here's a cool little thing about this pattern and about historical patterns. They oftentimes cheat to have less expensive fabric where you can't see it. So for example, this is the back panel of my kirtle skirt. And what's happening here is that this dotted line marks generally where you want your less nice fabric and then your nicer fabric, so that if it peeks out from under the hem, it will still look nice. So this is a great way to cheat and save a little bit of money because, as we all know, silk is not cheap. So what I'm going to do is cut this outer lining and then split these two and cut the silk out of the bottom part and then cut another of this fabric for the top to save on a little bit of money and make sure I have enough fabric for the sleeves.
So this is super not wanting to focus because it's very dark and the lighting is not that good. But I have gotten all of the lining pieces pinned in to the bodice. I did each panel separately instead of sewing them all up and then putting them all as one, because I felt like I had more control over it that way. So it's just at the edges, folded under slightly like that. And it'll just be whip stitched down all the way around and along the connecting seams. Hi, welcome to my floor. So, I've been working on this project for probably around a month at this point, maybe a little bit less, and I've got the bodice just about done, but I've hit a little bit of a roadblock. I am currently sitting on one of my skirt panels for the kirtle, and I realized last night that I didn't get enough fabric for it, which really sucks. So basically the way the skirt works is that there's 4 layers in it on the front. There's the lining, the cotton layer, a canvas layer, and then the outer layer, which is, for me, silk. On the rest of the panels besides the front, so there's 1 front and then 2 back panels for the kirtle, it's a cotton upper and then the lining. So I had enough cotton for the front, so I can kind of start working on that a little bit, but I don't have enough of the cotton for anything else, which really sucks because I bought like extra wide cotton just for that, but I'm so bad at math. I did not do it properly. I got 2 yards, I think, of it, maybe 3, and I needed like 5 because the panels are so wide, and in the directions they tell you that you are going to need to piece it, and I am prepared to do that if necessary, but even with the amount of fabric I have right now, piecing wouldn't be enough to fix the issues that I'm having. So I put in an order for some more of that, which was really frustrating, but it'll get here sooner or later, and in the meantime, I'm going to keep working on this, I guess. I'm honestly so sick of basting. I'm so sick of basting, but that's like half of this project. So I'm probably gonna baste all these layers together. Right now they're just pinned. I last night spent about an hour basting the canvas into the cotton. So I'm gonna keep working on that and then maybe start working on the pleats on the front, since you don't have to have the back finished to do the front pleats. And hopefully my other fabric will get here in time once I finish that. The bodice is pretty much good to go.
I just need to get the skirts into it before I can close it up. So here's hoping that goes well. What else? So the instructions say that you're supposed to sew them right sides together and then turn it in and then fold the lining under to match that. I got ahead of myself and already have folded and ironed in the lining and the outer fabric on both sides. So what I'm probably going to end up doing is stuffing the skirt in between those layers and then hand sewing them down from the inside so that it grabs the outer fabric but doesn't show on the outer fabric. Or I might unfold it and uniron that part, which would be a real pain, but I'm not sure yet. We're gonna find out. But in the meantime, I'm gonna get started on working on this bad boy, and hopefully it'll go good. So I'll check in with you guys again in a little bit. So since I last saw you, I have worked quite a bit. I finally got the fabric in for the paneling for the back, so everything's been sewn up for the skirt. I've got all the pleats basted into place with a pretty long stitch from the sewing machine, and all of them are good to go in the front and the back. The side is now sewn up, and I have ironed that, so I'm going to wait to take out all of the white thread marks until the absolute last minute, just in case something goes wrong and I have to unpick everything. It's very heavy. There's a lot of fabric in here. There's 4 layers in the front, 3 layers in the back, 4 just like on top of each other. It's a lot. So, oh god. Also, one of the seams went a little wonky when I was trying to get it to fit, so I'm probably going to have to unstitch from here down to the bottom and restitch this. It's not wanting to meet up perfectly. You can see over here where it basically is like 2 different lengths, and I'm not sure what happened there. I'm not sure if the pattern did this or if I did something wrong when I was making it. I don't know. But suffice to say that it's a lot, and the camera's also having a really hard time focusing on any of this, so if my video footage turns out a little bit blurry, I apologize. It really doesn't like dark colors, like, at all. But isn't this fabric so pretty? Well, anyways, I am going to fix that seam line, and then I'm going to sew this into the bodice, which is one of the last steps I have for this whole process, so that's pretty exciting. Back to work. Oh my god. So, the dress is mostly sewn on at this point, and this was single-handedly one of the most frustrating processes I have ever experienced in my life. I may have cried a little bit. It's fine. Basically, the way it works is at the front here you've got this point, and the skirts were not working with it, and it was fighting me, and there were too many pins, and I kept stabbing myself, and it was just a disaster. But it's pretty much all in now, so I'm not going to dwell on the past. I've got the lining mostly in, so I just need to go through on the underside and sew that down and give these a good good iron, so that they stay up in their nice little pleats. And then I'm almost done. Okay, so, again, I'm having a real hard time getting the camera to focus since it's all such dark colors, so that's fun. But I have just finished doing the edges here in a pinking shear so they won't fray as much. The original directions called for this to not be turned under like modern seams, but actually to be bound in like a bias tape or something. So what I'm probably going to do is just cut some strips of the silk fabric from scraps left over from this and the sleeves that I'm going to have to make, and bind it with that. I don't actually think I need to do it in a bias because it's such a subtle curve, if there's any curve at all, that I think a straight grain will be able to handle it no matter what.
The tape was sewn on by machine on the outside through all the layers and then closed by hand on the inside with whip stitches through only the lining layers. With the tape on, the garment was finished and ready to be tried on.